of the Emoji Circle. My name is Keith Smokey Johnson, and along with my Rafiki, Brother Derek Williams, that you see to the side of me here, and also we want to thank Sister Laura Thompson and TAN TV for bringing us, giving us the opportunity to do this on a Sunday evening. Normally we do it on Mondays from the studio of TVSA, where we tape most of our shows. But this is a unique experience, and it was Sister Laura wanted to have us talk about the violence that is being perpetrated throughout America. I know you all know what happened in Uvalde a couple of weeks ago, and 2 weeks before that there was the Buffalo, and there was all these other things that happened, El Paso, and so on and so forth. The January 6th attack on the Capitol building, which was a violent act. So we're going to discuss this thing from our perspective. That's what we do at the Emoji Circle. For those of you who have never seen the show or are new to the show, it is an African-centered talk show. That's what we are. And we try to correct errors where errors are found, and we try to introduce facts where we find that so many people are working on fiction when it's based on who we are as African people. And only through a truth of the actual reality of our conditions and our perspective that we can come to a truth. And if you don't know yourself, you cannot fix the things that you need to do. So I want to introduce my friend here. Now, since I've introduced the show, Brother Derek Williams, and we'll start our discussions about this topic about violence and violence in the community. And there is a reason. America cannot be America as it is today without fear and violence in it. And it sounds kind of difficult to understand, but I hope through our dialogue we'll try to bring light to this reality that we must face head on. Brother Derek, I remember one of the shows, this brother used to be in social action back in the day when he was in the Air Force. He had experience with equal opportunity. He would go to many different organizations to root out or explain what racism is, especially to the dominant group of white Americans. And he would get some interesting feedback. So we'd like to start first, before you can understand how we function in the society, we got to understand the society itself. And we will start talking in context of the society that we're in. Because if you want to understand how a society is functioning, you look at the vulnerable and how the vulnerable is treated. Because they are the first signs of something that's going wrong. Let's use the example before I get to brother Derek here. If you use the example of COVID, who was the first that COVID hit? But the vulnerable, which reflected how our defenses and what's wrong and how prepared the larger society is. That we saw where we weren't. But the vulnerable is the first sign. But it comes, but what we're dealing with racism and violence in America, well, there is a reason why. Brother
Well
Derek,
said.
yeah.
Well said, Smokey. And I first of all want to thank Laura Thompson for sponsoring us. The African American Network, of course, has the local field and global reach. And I just want to give her a prop for the outstanding work that she is doing in the community. I personally feel that every community should have its voice. And of course, many communities have a need to have a unique perspective because they're unique in the consequences for them being here in America. And Smokey introduced me as having a background in the service in the race relations area, social actions field. I was at the Defense Race Relations Institute or Equal Opportunity Management Institute. And of course, we were very concerned with the topic of racism, discrimination. Of course, violence wasn't always an integral part or the possibility of emanating from that. I often tell Smokey, when you talk about any topic, particularly this topic, we must keep in mind that you have to look at it from a systems perspective. And what I'm essentially saying is that all things are connected. All things are connected. One bubble bumps into the next one as a chain, and that chain link connects to another. And too often we have discussions and policy development from an isolated standpoint. And so we must have the time, first of all, the honesty, the candidness, the frankness, the analysis, intentionality for seeing how things came about. Okay. And so, as Smokey pointed out, when we look at America, a very unique place with very unique consequential outcomes. You know, we had slavery in this country for 246 years, and then another 100 and something years of Jim Crowism. And that created certain conditions. It created certain mindsets, certain dispositions. And a lot of what we see is intricately locked into the aspect of our past. Okay, the past is now. Okay, you talk about tomorrow, you go to sleep and it's today. You know, that's a conceptual false model. But everything is linked. And when we look at the violence in America, we have to recognize that America is the most violent country on the face of the earth. Okay,
Exactly.
whether or not we want to accept that or not. And
Let
so,
me bring this point to your
yes,
point, brother.
absolutely.
And there are 330 million American citizens, right? But in this country, there are over 450 million guns alone. Okay? You've been in the military, and I was in the military before we retired. Any landmass on this earth that we would send our troops, our sons and daughters to fight, if you had that kind of proliferation of firearms in the population, it would not be called a resort. It would be called a war zone. So
Absolutely.
if you have 400 million guns right now floating around America that is known, okay, you got the ones that are not known, so the numbers could be higher. And you only have 330 million in a population, which is a large population, then there's something wrong with that logic. Another logic point is that on this planet Earth, of the billions and billions of people on this planet, the United States population is only 4%, okay? But in reality, of all the guns on this planet, we own 50% or more of the guns on the planet Earth. There is something wrong. And even though we are told that this is the land of the free, this is the home of the brave, we are given a mythology. And if we're working on a mythology, you can't be working on truth. Okay? A lot of people spend a lot of money to get counseling and psychiatrists and psychologists, and they speak quietly in rooms to deal with the fact that people are lying to themselves, that their actions don't reflect the words that come forth. So when I hear land of the free and we do things for liberty and justice, America does not and has not, potentially can live up to those words. But up to this day, for those in power, no, there is no such thing as liberty or freedom when you're lying to yourself. And I remember you told me that thing that you found based on the feedback of those white individuals who went to your workshop. All of them would say they feared that we would do to them. How would that term go?
Well, you know, one of the models that we use is deep introspection. We created an environment where people had the freedom to talk, to cross differences.
Mm-hmm.
And then invariably, when people felt enough trust to share where they are or where they were, the thing that would invariably come up is that the reason why I resist the idea of you having the same amount of freedom that I have is because I'm afraid that if you have a point of equality, that you will do the same thing to us that we did to you. And you know, it's hilarious, but it's also sad because the reality is that people of color, and particularly African Americans and Black folk, you know, all we want is an opportunity to live. If people only knew how we get up every day just saying, just give me an opportunity. But if you have not accepted the reality of the past, and remember what I said about the past, Smokey, that all new birth requires pain, okay? Whether it's psychological pain, whether physical pain, but to come into a new place of perspective, there's a painful component attached to that. And so when you look at the racial aspect of violence, you have to recognize that this country used violence to maintain the institution of slavery. I mean, you know, you can go look at the legislative acts, the black codes, the slave codes, and they are literally hilarious. But it shows you the extent that people went through to maintain control. Black and white not being able to look out of the same window together, not being able to buy anything in a pharmacy. And that tells you just how deeply ingrained the fair component is. Because historically, that's exactly the tracking system that you see.
And there is something that we must understand, that you cannot solve any problems on this earth unless you deal with the history that brought that problem into being. Okay, there is the present moment where the problem is facing you, and there's the precedent, the stream that led to this event. Let's look at even the word present to see how we were miseducated. The word present, spell it out P-R-E-S-E-N-T, okay? We think we're talking about the now, right? That's the normal education. But I learned from many of my studies of ancient African ways of seeing, because we don't go by our way of seeing, we're going by other groups and the dominant group's way of seeing the world. That's what we got disconnected from in 1619. You know, and you're correct about the fear-based aspect of maintaining millions of people that look like us. That's the genesis of this gun culture. But if you look at the word present and you separate the P-R-E from the S-E-N-T, what do you have? The pre-sent moment. Okay? It's not the present moment, it's the pre-sent moment. So this moment is sent to you by events that happened in the past. Yeah. And if you don't understand that pathway, you will never, ever be able to fit the results. For example, if I come into an emergency room, okay, and I go to the nurse's desk and I said, my arm is swollen and I got pain. Okay, that's the present moment. Okay, it was sent to this doctor, sent to me by something I did 5 minutes ago, an hour ago. It's always going to be something in the past.
Yes,
now,
yes,
that doctor is not going to deal with you in the present moment. Why? What's the first thing they're going to do to you? They're going to go and give you a chart. And what are they going to give you? Ask you, who are you? Where'd you come from? You know, they're going to ask for your medical history.
Yes, yes.
Before they even touch you, before they can find, until you see that history or what happened in the car wreck or sliding into first base or whatever caused this thing in the past, then he could diagnose and solve the problem. He couldn't solve it when you walked in the door.
Yes, yes.
See, and we want to deal with this problem in our community, all right? The violence or the violence of America by what we see now. Yet we ignore the history of America.
Yes, yes.
You know, when you go to get financing, what do they ask you for? Financial history.
Financial history. Yes.
You know?
Yes.
You cannot function as a viable human being without historical data. Where's your car parked now? You got to use historical data to backtrack.
Yes.
If God forbid something hits you on the head and you become amnesiac and all your memories of self all your historical memories go, you wouldn't be able to leave your spot. Yet
That's
we
an
are
excellent
taught,
point, Smokey.
yes, we
And
are taught
yeah,
to hate history. How many black
yes,
people have you seen said, "Boy, history is boring"?
yes.
How can you function as a human being without that? Go ahead, brother.
And the unfortunate thing at this point is that there is actually a movement to discourage the inquiry into history. And from a historical standpoint, from any analysis standpoint, to be able to pull back and to look and to see how B affected C and how D expects impacts on E. The whole foundation of learning and freeing ourselves and learning from the past requires us to go back and examine history. And now you actually see schools prohibiting the discussion of topics that make someone uncomfortable. And the irony and the silliness of that is it shows you how isolated that thought foundation is, because no one gives a good hoot about how sensitive or how offended I am. And so it even establishes the very nature of putting forth that the prerequisite says you pay no attention to me, but you feel okay about making that a requirement for other people. So part of our problem, and when we link these issues with violence, as we said, America is, you learn to be violent. I mean, we see more violent movies. We talked about Arnold Schwarzenegger, how many people he kills in the first 5-10 minutes, 25, 30, 40, 50 folk, before you can even get the popcorn out the microwave. Okay. And you see the very violent nature. Guns are always the ultimate resolution. We don't even teach alternatives. And children see this. Children see this at a very young age. When they're watching that TV, that blue-eyed devil, it's teaching your children. And half the time, parents are so busy trying to get dinner ready, you don't even pay any attention to what the child is watching. And you multiply that another 15, 16, 18 years, and then you wonder why a violent alternative is the most likely choice, because it's so integrated, it is saturated into so many aspects of our culture. We don't teach conflict mediation and resolution. If we get into it, you say, hey, you're trying to get into value clarification. So it's almost as if we have become mute, immune to the saturation of the violence. And in a sense, we have. Okay? We have. But it is my opinion that to break away from the present status quo, we are going to have to begin to see the connection, that systems perspective that I alluded to earlier. You can talk for a year and a day, but until you find out what motivated this and where that came from, and you can only get that information, as you said, by taking a historical journey and asking those questions. So you can see the tremendous nature of our challenge here, in wanting to hold on to that status quo, the fear that if I give in, you're going to do the same thing that I did to you, and the belief that the almighty gun is the weapon that will prevent that from happening, when in fact it leads to our total annihilation.
This reminds me of a historical fact that Dr. Martin Luther King had the same question, and like many of the adults at that time in the 1960s, there was violence in the Black community. Okay, there were young brothers and sisters joining gangs or shooting each other. When you're in a violent world and you don't have any kind of connection to who you truly are, you're going to take on and internalize the environment around you. Black people were world people for thousands and thousands of years, and then because of the Holocaust of enslavement, we got shrunk down to city blocks and defending our blocks and have no concept of us as being world people, okay? And we have the same ideas that we internalized from those who once controlled us for 246 years of enslavement, and another 100 years or so from 1865 to 1965, calling apartheid. Because we use all these euphemisms created by those who once controlled us. They determined the words and how you use it. We have to reestablish what was done to us by our own terminology. The ancestors require us to do that. The way I do it when I get prepared for a show is that, first of all, I want to say that studying is my form of meditation, okay? Especially studying our people. I take a trip back into my mind, into history, and the way I do it is the books that I read, okay? That's where I talk to the ancestors. All the myriad of books that were written by people that look like me, going back hundreds of years that we don't know about, that I put out, and they talk to me and whisper in my ear, and I bring it forward into this time, this present moment when we talk on the show. That's where I get these points from. It ain't coming from only me and just sitting in a room. It comes from the ancestors that I studied, who dealt with these issues. You think that we had violence in our community only happened in the 21st century? It's been from 1619 in our communities. Most of it from our people who control our communities. The earliest police department, talking about criminal justice, just for a point. The first modern day type police department was in Boston in 1836 or 1838, first one. You think those white police officers who were once patty rollers, was the term for slave patrollers, who had stars and badges, but when they be organized into the police force that we see today represented in uniform, you think that they were not conditioned to see us as another caste? Okay, that we were not part of the dominant caste, which is the white caste. We were outcasts, no different than what you have in India. That's what we're talking about, right, Derek, when we, in the next couple of series of discussions, that we will continue and taping for about 2 more shows, 4-part series, based on a book by Isabella Wilkerson called Caste. She did a great study that showed that what was created in America was a slave society, a caste society. And no matter how you want to act, there's always been 2 Americas. And when we talk about the Constitution, if you're Black, okay, you're acting like you were part of that upper class caste America. You were never part of that. That's why you can get shot driving a car, and the way you act, well, that person who's conditioned to look at you based on the color of your skin see a danger, because we didn't take it lightly. We didn't accept the positions we are. We rose up, and that's the fear that Brother Derek was talking about that's still instilled in most white Americans today. This is hard stuff to talk about, but this is how it must be done. We can't beat around the bush if we want to heal ourselves. If we show that we're unable to heal ourselves, then we could ask for all the policies in the world. If we don't show that we're capable of doing that, that means you got to face the truth. You got to be that doctor to diagnose.
Thank you, Smokey, for bringing that aspect to the surface. As you know, as a trainer, and I have to, often tell people everything is not resolved through training, but it's a beginning. It identifies some of the critical areas that are necessary. And of course, I have spent a large part of my career after getting out of the military teaching race relations to organizations, large and small, private, governmental. And of course, the police department has often been a target population of much of the training that I've provided. And I can tell you that while all police are not bad, and that would be a simple statement, even though there may be those who believe that, the culture of policing is something that truly needs to receive more than self-examination. I have done training where I have insisted that we do certain activities and have actually had police officers reach on the side of their leg and pull off the little private weapon and lay on the table as if to say, I'm not going anywhere. I'm not moving anywhere. And I share that because that takes a certain disposition to do something like that when you have been sent to training by a city's mayor, you know. And so when you look at the police department, how many people see their role, there is no question in my mind that the issue of law and order and selective policing is still essentially one of the major problems in this country. There is no way. There's no way. And I've been involved in enough personal incidents where I had to engage someone and ask, why are you doing this? Or get your hand off your gun. You're stopping me, asking me some, simple fundamental traffic questions. And you're saying it with your hands on your gun. And so I mention that because that's not all the police officers, but it speaks to the culture. It speaks to the culture. And as you know, I was involved in a mass shooting in 2019. Well, it's mass to me, where 3 young men got gunned down. And I literally had to tell the responding police, put your weapons back in your holster in certain parts of the investigation, but I understood that the fear element, the idea that there were some black people involved in the shooting, and by golly, I have to take a stance of primacy because it may happen again. The conscientiousness was lacking. There was more of a position of you could see the fear. And I tell people, don't think because someone has a gun on their hip that there's not an element of fear involved here. Okay. And if you look at a particular group of people being bigger than normal, bigger than life, requiring a gang of police officers to subdue that person just simply because of the color of his skin, you have to ask the question, where does that come from? And again, that's built into our culture. So this quick snap response without doing the proper analysis or violence intervention is something that is saturated throughout this country because that department came out of an era primarily to maintain the status quo. And what was the status quo? To keep them in place and to keep them from getting in a position to do to us what we've done to them. And we don't address that. We mild manner paddle. We don't want to address the critical issues that impact on personality development. And so you put that against the history of colonization, the institution of slavery, the hundreds of years of maintaining a particular status quo, and you can understand where that kind of behavior comes from, and that training is very small in terms of being the intervention process that's needed. We got a lot of work to do in this country, Smokey. A lot of work. And anytime someone tells you we're going to eliminate that even from school and come up with, critical race theory, but anytime you talk about race, it's a critical race theory because it requires critical analysis. There's always critical analysis in everything. But to actually develop a atmosphere of rejection to talk about truth in our history, we got a lot of work. And like you said, policy development and training just ain't enough.
Introduce this book. This is the book that Derek and I are discussing on our regular scheduled show. We're doing a 4-part talk. We did part 1 and part 2, and we're going to be doing part 3 and part 4 next week. It should be coming on the air. It is called Caste by the sister Isabel Wilkerson. She's a Pulitzer Prize winning author. She gives classes at Harvard and Princeton and other great universities to us to talk about this. She came across this type of perspective. When she talked about the caste, that's what I got the information of the caste system that was created in America We did not just have a enslaved system, we were also a caste system, just like India. She went to India to see about their caste system, and they were just being treated, the untouchables were treated the same way. And there's an interesting story that I found in this book. It is about, our first show, I found a video of Dr. Martin Luther King himself and his experience when he went to India in 1959. And I'll give you a little perspective. This is in our first show of this series. In 1959, he went to India. It was like India was celebrating Martin Luther King because, he was a proponent of Mahatma Gandhi, who was the nonviolent protest. And then also they had their independence in 10 years earlier. Okay, and he met the Prime Minister, Nehru, I think the Prime Minister at that time. But he asked them he wanted to meet some untouchables, okay, that lower caste in India that's been around for thousands of years. And she studied that system. And they took him to the state of Kara and the city of Trevithian. And in that city, they took him to a high school where the untouchable children were being educated. Okay, the words are not the difference. You'll find similarity is in the actions. Okay, they use the word untouchables. They call us Negroes or segregated the N-word. Okay, but the system is still similar. At the time, we don't think like that. Okay, and some of you never thought about it until this moment. I'm bringing this point across. When he was being introduced by the principal of that school in the city of Trevithian, the principal at the end of his introduction said to the students, because he was an untouchable too, okay, but segregated in their system, he said, "I would like you to welcome one of us, an untouchable, Dr. Martin Luther King." Okay, now he talked about this situation in 1965. This happened in 1959. But he talked about this situation and how it affected him when he was compared to an untouchable in India by those people who recognized truth. And he said he was pissed. Well, he didn't use the word pissed. He would use the word missed in the colloquialism of that time. But if you know what it means, same thing. Yeah, pissed. But he said he thought about it on the way home. He thought about it when he got home, and he started looking at the conditions of us in America for 400 years. I mean, it was 400 years at the time, but for 200 years of enslavement, and almost another 100 years of Jim Crow and segregation, and that's what he saw. What's the difference between us? The principal was right, and it shook him that we were treated like the people of India treat their outcasts. Brother Derek, what do you think about it?
Well, I think a lot about it, and I think that this drives a lot of the behavior that we see, that people have actually assumed that and have been assigned certain behaviors to keep the dichotomy between the different groups. And one way of maintaining that status quo is to induce and to maintain fear. Okay? And so if you see our society as a system of stratified groups, and you see African Americans or Black people and other people of color at the bottom strata, okay, you will find yourself automatically fulfilling the role prescriptions that you feel will maintain that status quo. I mean, you can see it in a simple conversation. I've had people who have stopped to look at their watch, okay, so it'll throw them back a half a second so they wouldn't have to open the door for me because I'm Black, okay? And so once you understand the caste system, and that there is certain behavioral assignments And of course, in India, people readily accept, hey, I'm born into this, and this is my role. It's like, they'll go to the corner without being told to go to the corner. And you even see that in America as well. Folk will do what they think you want them to do because you don't elevate yourself high enough to feel that you deserve anything else. So that book that Sister Wilkerson wrote, I think it gives us an opportunity to not only have the element of race as one of the causative factors, but role assignment and prescription of different orders of groups here in this country. And that's why I feel that book is such a powerful tool for doing the proper analysis and investigating some of the behavior that we see, whether it be in the order of police shootings or discriminatory practices, because you always have to ask the question, why? Her book explains the reason for much of that dysfunctional discriminatory behavior. And it also explains the reason for the willingness and the quickness to have a finger quick action when you're holding a gun in your hand. Okay. And of course, that's not to suggest that all groups, particularly African Americans, we always hear about black on black crime. Well, most of the crime that anyone commits is on their particular group. So that's an interesting term in and of itself. But the lack of mediation techniques, conflict management techniques, understanding what conflict suppression does, understanding the impact of the media on the mental development of a small child. Okay. We have to go beyond just merely passing a bill. We have to redirect our consciousness and taking a serious look at how did we get here? I can tell you how we got here, but you got to be critical in your thought. And if we're going to criticize critical analysis, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, we'll never get there.
I want to show another book here that goes to, what Brother Derek was just talking about. Okay, there's two Americas. Let's just get this straight. You have the dominant caste, white America, that you see in the history book, Jefferson and Washington and Thomas Edison, and anything white facing is what we get as American history. But there's another history that is always put on the bottom shelf that we have to dig up and research. There is people who've done the work for us. This book has an interesting title. That nonviolent stuff will get you killed. Okay. Okay, this is published by Duke University Press. And the author of this book chronicles that we get this image of Black people when you see movies like Gone with the Wind and Birth of a Nation and all these white-facing producers of this mythology of white dominance, white supremacy that is being echoed in the halls of Congress to this very day, which are lies. Black people did not just sit there docile. Okay, we were not just. Well, you want to know why Black weapons got in our community? Why we carried weapons? Not to shoot each other, but to defend ourselves. And this statement was an actual statement that when Martin Luther King went to, I think it was Mississippi or Alabama, to one of his many stops during his civil rights activities, there was an old man, leave it to the elders, who had some wisdom, because he living in Mississippi. He understands the Ku Klux Klan. He understands what was going on in his community. And you're talking about peaceful Mahatma Gandhi, even though Mahatma Gandhi ended up being assassinated, violence. Okay, that not, and it's a funny book, but it's a serious book. It showed that we fought back. We were never docile. There were 246 slave revolts. You wondering why the white class or the white caste was always fearful? Read their journals, read their diaries, read their letters to each other in those colonies, not only in America, but throughout the diaspora, in Barbados, in Jamaica, okay, in New York State. We we said enough is enough. This is not who we are. We are human beings. You come at us, we will come at you. And there's another book that says, we will shoot back. Look how thick that book. It chronicles all kinds of events that happened in America where Black people said, no. You think that what happened in Black Wall Street was only thing? What happened in Winston-Salem? I think it's in North Carolina when they had that coup d'etat in Wilmington, North Carolina. In 1898, when they overthrow a legally voted in government, the same white Americans with the same ideas. You see, we look at behaviors as the problems. That's, again, miseducation. The African will tell you, you must look at the ideas that produce those behaviors. There has to be an idea. Malcolm called it established order logic, the logic of the dominant group to justify their actions against people that other human beings. You can't enslave people for 246 years, then go to church every Sunday, pilgrims who wiped out the same Native Americans who helped them, in 10 years after they got there, they were at war with the Native Americans who they landed on. And you're gonna have to carry weapons. You're gonna have to justify the violence you do on other people. That's the American way. That is not what you're taught in school. That's not how you're taught. You've got to distract the mind. Where the mind goes, the body goes. And if the information you're working on is false, the way you see the present moment, the present moment will be false. Where you look at us as violent people is false.
I think the importance of what you're saying, Smokey, is that you truly have to appreciate that violence begets violence. And when we talk about the future, we can predict the future, okay? Any group after a while, if you're constantly assaulting that group over and over and over, and they have a history of being assaulted, it's a very natural defense mechanism that says no more. And I tell people, when we talk about America, America is so fortunate to have African Americans in it, even with our past, because often, in my opinion, African Americans are the only ones speaking the truth. Okay, we have been more patriotic than any group on the face of the earth. We've fought in every war that there is to fight in. Those soldiers that came back from World War I and World War II and were not included in all of the programs to integrate them back into society. And what did we do? We smiled, we bared it, and we said, please, and we went to the courts. And so when you talk about the courts and the legislative systems that are in place, the things that we use to bring about order in this democratic experiment, and it is an experiment, okay? When the systems that have been designed by our so-called founding fathers, not my founding father, but you understand the concept, okay, fail, when they do not work, I hope everyone that looks at that keeps in mind some of the things that you've just pointed out, that people will eventually fight back, okay? People will eventually fight back. It was an interesting thing. We brought my mother-in-law here before her passing, and she was 95 years of age. And she was, she came from Mobile, Alabama, and she's 95. She's very quiet and subdued at times. And during her stay with us, we were amazed at the comments that she would make at 95. Like, you think that's what they're doing, or enough is enough. This is a 95-year-old person who grew up in Jim Crow era, at the eve of her death, pointing out enough is enough. And so if we truly want to be part of the American dream, we got to stop dreaming and have a vision, because to dream, you got to be asleep. Yeah? Visions are mostly seen when you're awake. And I'm saying that if these systems don't work that we have in place, And if you give credence and support to being able to take over the Capitol and take back the presidency and introduce a lie that everybody knows is a lie, okay? And you use that, you continue to use that. I'm saying to you, the future of America is predictably very bleak. As Smokey said, and I can certainly testify to that. Okay. You know, I've learned conflict mediation skills, and I know that there are other alternatives, but I'm also going to defend my family. Okay. Even if that means that I have to give up the ghost. Now, I am a senior. I'm a father, a grandfather, and a great grandfather. And I want to teach my children alternative ways of conflict resolution and resolving issues. But when they constantly see on TV people being gunned down without weapons, shot in the back, mass killing, and you're telling them, oh, you know, there are alternative ways for resolving this. Okay. You know what they're going to say? I love you, Papa. Okay. I love you, Papa. But I don't see that working here. And that's the danger, America. That's the danger we face. If we want to make this experiment work, okay, so we fell off the horse. Damn it, get back up on the horse. If you fall down, try and land on your back, because if you can look up, you can get up. America can give up. But what you hear me and Smokey saying, okay? You're not going to routinely hear this on MSNBC and certainly not Fox or the stations that have their periodic break to fix things up. And that's the beautiful thing about the platforms that we have. But I want you to know that if you've ever had, and we both are retired military people, where we were there to go to war. We were in the conflict areas, fighting for a belief, a concept. Remember, the flag is just a piece of material. That's all. You can wrap it around you. You can make a skirt out of it. You can make a pair of pants out of it. You can make a towel out of it. The concept is up here, is in our hearts. And to make that piece of cloth fly, you know, and I get teary-eyed, you know, because I've been in the service for over 20 years. And I see that flag wave, and I think about all the places I've been and the things I've had to do. When a military person begins to question that flying piece of cloth, you know that we are getting to a point in this country that we're running out of time. And I'm saying, we want to be brothers and sisters, we better start acting like it. And that's to my white brothers and sisters and the other groups and those who are on probation for becoming white. This is a serious issue. And we've spent a while here, and we're not going back to Africa. Okay? We'll go there to visit. And Ghana said, come back any day we want. And I may go to visit. But the blood of my people are here. Okay? And we're about to lose a very significant segment of our population. And I'm here to tell you, all new birth requires pain. But when you get to the point where you're willing to give up the ghost, you know that we're reaching a critical point. And so our plea to America is either now or never.
These children who are going to school, when these children who are going to school now, preparing for an America that won't exist if these Republicans, these neocons, these white supremacists who've been patiently putting themselves in the proper position, not since Trump, but since the 1964 Civil Rights Act first, before the ink was dry. They've been long-term preparing for the 21st century or whenever they were in the proper place. Okay, that's why I said earlier, if you don't understand the history, you won't understand the present moments. This is not a recent thing. In fact, I remember in one of our shows, Derek, again, when we introduced the caste system, I brought up a documentary that many of you might have been familiar with. It's a documentary called The Civil War. I think it came out in 1991. Ken Burns produced it. That's what made him famous. it was like a 6 or 8 series night series. The first block of it, they started with speaking from Frederick Douglass, and then there was another end of it, and it was I can't remember her name, but it was a Black historian, famous. God forgive me. I know I can see her face, but I can't remember her name right now. But she said this. She quoted Faulkner, William Faulkner, and which he said that the past is never past. Okay, the past is now. And I extended to say that the flower of the present moment comes from that past. That's what we're trying to tell you. This present moment is the fruit that comes from the past. And if your past is screwed up, the fruit will be distorted. But he said that means that the Civil War will never finish because it's not the behavior. The South was compliant and they let some blacks into schools or whatever. But the ideas of the Civil War, the idea that for hundreds of years between the Declaration of Independence and the December when they started saying they were leaving the Union of 1860, which was the Southern idea of enslavement and where we belong in our proper place, okay, that it ended up in a 4-year horrendous, violent war that the South lost physically, but the idea continued, passed on from generation to generation to generation to this very day. You still hear state rights coming out of Washington, coming out of the state capital of Texas, okay, the right to bear arms. Okay, the same idea, because we weren't allowed to bear arms after 1776 or when the Constitution was ratified. Heck, we wasn't even a human being. We were just 3/5 of a human being. Okay, that's how they looked at us. The first time they counted us in the census was in 1870. Prior to that, we were with the cattle, the corn. Okay, Tawney said in 1857. Okay, he said that no matter what laws are passed, a black person in this country will never have the rights that white people would have because we are property. Two Americas again. And I didn't come up with this aspect of two Americas for this show. The United States government did. In 1967, after one of the many riots that happened in the mid-60s, uprisings basically, where you had military soldiers roaming the streets of Detroit, Chicago, New York, Newark, New Jersey, LA, machine gun nests on corners. Of course, it was in the black community. We always say that black people are revolutionary or we try to commit. No, we are reactionary. It's just like the football player. He gets punched by the offensive lineman, that he retaliates and the referee see him. People did not rise up in East LA because they didn't know what to do, what happened. It's because there was decades of abuse by the police. And it only took a car stop in which a police and a black woman was punched and beat up. That's a traffic stop, a ticket. But they got abused, and it's happened over and over and over and over. And like Frederick Douglass said, you could tell the amount of power of an oppressor by the amount of power or oppression the people allows him to have until they say no more. And when we had those risings in those times of the 60s, it wasn't because we're evil people, because we had enough. We were supposed to be Americans 100 years earlier, right? 13th Amendment, 14th Amendment, 15th Amendment, right to vote. But then you still have to have a 1967 Voting Rights Act. What lie are we living on?
Yes. Well, as we look to bring some of our discussion to a closure on this opportunity, Um, there's a few little points of considerations that I would like to just mention um, that I think is essential as we look at the reduction of violence, the opportunity to make the place that we live in a better place. Uh, Keep in mind that when we use the term community, we use that almost interchangeably. Most of the places we live in are neighborhoods. Okay, communities are places that you can feel safe. You can get a job. You can turn your dollar over 15, 16, 17 times. And that's not the Black community. I can assure you of that. And if you're talking about an aggregation of people, there's sporadic segments of neighborhoods where people hang their hats and sleep at night. And you survey your environment and you can be able to make that determination. And everything should end on a positive point. We should always look for something good because the flip side of everything contains both sides. You can't know heads without knowing tails. You can't know the concept of good without knowing the concept of bad. The one defines the other. You don't even know what day is unless you know what night is. So accept the reality that things come together in two isms, and sometimes three, because you got your heads and tail, but you got the rim of the coin that connects the two together. There's you, there's me, but the most important thing is there is us. Okay? Learn to apologize. That's not hard to do, but for some of us, it's impossible. It's not a weakness. Respect cultural differences. They run the gamut, believe me. And sometimes you can share the same cultural component, but it appears somewhere different on the culture schema. Church might be number 3 for one person, might be number 15 for someone else. Eh? You criticize the woman whose child eats some lead paint off the wall, but you say nothing to the landlord that was told to remove it. No victim focus. Okay. And that's what has happened in America. We have truly focused on the victim. Affirm others. And you can do this in all kind of ways. I met a young man today, and he complimented my kufa. He was talking about my hat. He said, I like that, Miss Sir. That's nice. And I gave him a little history on it. And I asked him how old he was. And he said, I was 15. And he stuttered because I could have been his only time he had a conversation with an elderly Black guy. Yeah. And I told him, I remember when I was 15. Yeah. He said, you did? I said, oh, yes. I said, that was the year of me wanting to drive. And every opportunity I had, I got behind the wheel, even though I didn't have a license. And he laughed and we chuckled. He said, well, I'm kind of old fashioned and I don't know a lot of stuff. I said, just stay alive, son. Draw a bigger circle. Okay. But I had a choice. I could have just washed my hands and left the restroom. There are opportunities that come to us that can have an impact on reducing the thought of violence. It's okay that everybody fears a little rejection. Keep that in mind. Look for other alternatives, even if you haven't tried them before. Okay, try them out. Draw a bigger circle. Include more. Make time to listen, not just hear. Listen for emotion. You hear for sound. Be aware of opportunities. They're all around us. Me and Smokey learn more from our grandchildren than we ever thought we would. Okay. Choose a different method. Doesn't have to be tried and tested. Assume positive outcomes. Sometimes the outcome occurs later on. Just because someone doesn't acknowledge you, it doesn't mean that you haven't planted the seed, y'all. And don't be presumptuous. Okay. Smokey, my colleague here, Rafiki, my friend, is well over 6 feet. The weightlifter, very strong looking man, okay, in terms of his muscular development. And as gentle as a flower. Oh, he's a warrior too. But the presumptions that are made about him that he has to either deal with or walk away from are plentiful. Okay? So those are some of the things that we can do just in our normal life that can actually reduce violence. You wouldn't believe that. Eh? I was turned away from doing some training with a police department here in San Antonio. Eh? And my whole team was made up of a multiplicity of people, women, Hispanics, blacks, whites. But a certain group felt, well, I don't know if he should have the authority to do that. And I didn't get that opportunity. And so believe me, the solution is an admixture. Okay. And I just wanted to share those few little points because so often we get didactic in our presentations and we forget just the commonality of people, just being people. And Smokey, I wanted to share that because this is a momentous time for us in America. Okay. And I want to see my children grow up and their children. I'm in the checkout generation. I don't know how long I have. I live each day as full as I can live it. And I ain't looking to go nowhere. But I will go with a fight. I do love America more than America has loved me. I just wanted to, a departing shift.
I would like to add this point. That we started talking about how we heal ourselves with this against this violence in America. And I tell you that the answer is in the past through our ancestors, because they've been there as enslaved people, as people under apartheid. They ain't doing anything that we are reintroducing. We just had a 60-year, 50-year break between the 1960s and the 2022. That's it. 60 years, 50 years. Okay, compared to 246 years of enslavement where women got raped, we got lynched, we got brutalized, we got left out of a society because of the color of our skin. We were forced to work. The average lifespan of an enslaved person on a sugarcane, I hate to use the word plantation because that's one of those euphemisms that the progenitors of this horror show want to put in the history books. But they were these slave workforces, enslaved workforces. Okay, they were work camps. That's what we call plantations. Okay, they had to experience, and they were brilliant people. For example, Frederick Douglass didn't know how to read. It wasn't until his white owner, who once, quote, religious, taught him how to read using the Bible. And he was brilliant enough to fool her by saying, well, what's that word mean? What's that word? There was no institution that allowed him to do it. And if we had found him before she took him, and he was this ignorant, supposedly black child, we would call him the same way we're calling our young black men in our communities to this day. They were born into a system that they had to survive. Again, don't look at the behavior. Understand and change the ideas they are working on. We have Malcolms in that group. We have Frederick Douglasses. We have scientists. But we did not march directly out of enslavement into a ghetto. That was not where we decided to go. We were put there by the same people that owned us, the same people that point to us to this day and say something's wrong with those people. When you internalize trauma, you're going to get traumatic type of behaviors. Then you add 400 million guns, then you turn around and say, I wonder why we having problems. Why these angry kids are just shooting everything around them? They've been disconnected. Our ancestors, every ethnic group on that land that we come from, had systems that said, when you're 7 years old, whether you're Yoruba, Fani, Ga, Igbo, we're going to take your child, mother, father, and we're going to shape that child through rites of passages to fit our community. Why? Because that child that you say, leave me alone in America today, do whatever you want to do, that child will affect that community. Okay, that's why you have rites of passage. That's why when a young girl reaches the age of 8, the elder women say, "This is what we need of the females in our community." We got disconnected from that under enslavement. Then we are looking at the results of those behavioral patterns and say, "What's wrong with these people?" The fact that I'm here and my brother Derek, and we have doctors and lawyers and engineers and scientists that look like us, we weren't supposed to be that. In 1619, those English settlers said, "You are supposed to be a permanent working force." That's it. Just a body, you die, we bring in some more. In the Confederate Constitution, you allow that flag to fly all over the place without understanding that it represents permanent enslavement. That's what the Confederacy is about. And you think we would have the great American superpower that we have if we had 50 different individuals, north of the Mason-Dixon line, you have the American flag, and south of the Mason-Dixon line, you have the Confederate flag. If the Confederacy had won in 1865, you think that we would have a where each one of those states thought that they were an independent country? How will we have this America if black men, 186,000 black men, fought on the side of the American flag and defeated a system that would have made America not great again, but easy prey for foreign countries that would have definitely attacked this rich land? Because we all, when you balkanize a system, you chop it up into individual bickering units. That's what the Confederacy would have brought. And where is the Black Panthers? Let me ask you this question. Where is the Black Panthers today? They are destroyed and lost, infiltrated by this government because they were a threat, yet the Ku Klux Klan still exists? What ideas are we working on, brothers and sisters? And you want to know why we have violence in America? Why we have violence in a community? But again, I always ask my ancestors. And that's where our ways of knowing helps us, because we are ancient people.
Well said,
We've had
Smokey.
thousands of years. And I just want you to read an ancient Egyptian concept that might help you, okay, before we close out. It's called Saruta, Serud-TA. And this concept says that we should all live by, that our purpose by our ancestors is to restore that which is in ruins, to repair that which is damaged, to heal that which is injured, to rejoin that which is separated, to set right that which is wrong, to reinforce that which is fragile. Does not that sound like our Black communities? That is what our ancestors have charged us to do. To this day, are we listening to them? Or are we listening to those who once controlled us, who don't have our interests at heart? That we fall asleep and don't vote them out of office because the Confederacy, I tell you, are occupying the Republican Party. The ideas of the Republican Party is the ideas of the Confederacy. I'm saying it straight up. No holding back. Not beating around the bush. Because when your children who are 2 or 5 or 12 years old, like Brother Derek was saying, and next year, or their present moment or preset moment that is initiated by the choices you make of not voting and getting these people out, when you hit 2035 or 2044, when there's men and women and have to deal the results of the law that these people are going to put in place, that they're going to ask you, grandma or grandpa or mom, when you're older, what did you do? Why did you let this happen?
That's right.
Go ahead, brother.
Well, again, we are delighted to have had an opportunity to come and to share with those who made the time to listen. Um, when you think of allegiance, I want to remind you that 350, 400 years of bondage is a long time. And there is an African American, a Black perspective here, whatever you choose to call yourself. But I want you to think, America, what group in this country were the workers? And after such a long time, and promised to have 40 acres and a mule, and those things were taken away, and didn't even get a bag of seeds, a hoe, and spent the next 200 years just finding relatives and people that they lost. What more dedication and allegiance do you need from a group of people who says, I'll fight again and again and again? So we make America, we make the future. And in conclusion, as we go back to a midpoint in our discussion, solving the problem of police violence and its destructive impact on Black communities will take more than reforms, aims at reducing police shootings, and holding officers accountable. It will also require the country confront its history of racism, as so aptly pointed out by Keith Smokey Johnson, and white supremacy, and examine both the appropriate role of police in public safety and the scourge of gun violence in America. But the solutions outlined above would be meaningful steps that officials at every level of government and law enforcement can take. Police departments must work to reform both their policies and their mindsets among their officers. Mayors and city councils must act where local agencies refuse to change. Governors and state legislatures should set statewide standards that restrict excessive force in all jurisdictions. And the U.S. Department of Justice must restart patterns of practice, investigations of departments with an abusive history, which have led to critical reform and 35% declines in officer shootings, and local interventions and withholding money from actors that do not implement minimum standards for policing and life-saving reforms. And again, we want to thank Ms. Laura Thompson, the CEO of the African American Network that has a local field and a global reach. And we thank you for your dedication to the community, not just the Black community, while that is one of the critical objectives, but to the total community. We've seen this station network evolve since 2016, broadcasting and bringing to the public growthful ideas. And so we want to thank Ms. Laura Thompson. And we want to thank you all for making the time to listen to Keith Smokey Johnson and I. And we encourage you to listen to the Emoji Circle. What are the dates and times, Smokey, that we broadcast, that we show on the local media? It's Monday, I believe, at 11. And what?
I'm muted. You can find us on YouTube.
On YouTube, there you go.
Oh yeah, you just find us. Yeah, that'll be the easiest thing to do. We're on YouTube, and just go to TVSA, and we're we listed among all the shows that they produce down in the studio, and we're on there. But we also come on 11 a.m. on the various different channels, cable channels on Mondays, and at 7 p.m. on Mondays. Our shows go on, and I would like to say. Our Blackness is an ever-changing situation, okay? So don't despair. It is not who you say you are in the morning. That's what I mean about it ever changes. It's who you are at the end of the day after you measure the claims you made in the morning against what's left of you late at night. We all do that. We're all in the same boat. Okay? We are an ancient people. We are a world people. We are not shrunk down to a particular block. Okay? Remember that. And the ancestors are always with you. It's called DNA. Our culture, our mind, the psychology of the Black people is passed on through culture the way DNA is passed on biologically, you know, so we are passing it on. But the great psychologist, Black psychologist, Naim Akbar said, we all carry the mind of those who came before us. So the answers are there. Don't despair. The violence is part of America, but it's each one of us that must change it. And Malcolm also gave us this warning. It is either the ballot or the bullet. And your bullet is the ballot if you're an American citizen, okay? But you gotta know what your target is. And that's every last one of those people who put these laws in place that are killing our children. Politics is a war without bloodshed, but it's still a war. War is simply politics with bloodshed. Remember that. And everything that Derek say, I reflect. Peace, Hotep. Bye-bye.
Hotep.